Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable lives of ancient Egyptian slaves, the folks who built the pyramids but went home to mud brick apartments with the ventilation of a broken vape and the insulation of a wet paper bag. Basically, if ancient Egypt had Yelp reviews, housing would definitely be getting 1 star. So before you get comfortable in your climate-controlled paradise, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab your water, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's 4 a.m. by the Nile, and you're a fisherman trying to make a living in a reed boat that's basically a floating basket held together by hope, prayer, and what amounts to ancient duct tape. Your pottery lamp flickers with castor oil, casting dancing shadows on the cabin ceiling that's already stained black from months of soot. Think of it as the original mood lighting, except the mood is existential dread. Then you see it. A white wall of fog rolling down the river like nature's own horror movie special effect. Except this is scarier than anything Jordan Peele could dream up because you can't just leave the theatre. This isn't some gentle morning mist you see in romantic movies. This is a NASA-documented phenomenon that turns the entire Nile Valley into a walk-in freezer. The fog doesn't just reduce visibility, it penetrates everything. It seeps through the reed mat covering your boat's window, through the gaps in your linen tunic, and straight into your bones with a kind of cold that makes you question every life choice that led you to be on a river at 4 a.m. Your fingers, already numb from handling wet fishing nets, start to lose feeling entirely. It's like trying to use your phone in winter while wearing mittens, except your livelihood depends on maintaining dexterity, and there's no voice-to-text option for fishing. The fog brings with it a penetrating dampness that makes everything worse. Your linen clothing, which felt perfectly fine during the blazing desert day, now clings to your skin like a wet towel. Every breath you take feels like you're inhaling ice water, and your oil lamp, your only source of warmth and light, starts sputtering as moisture condenses on everything like the world's least helpful humidifier. Back on shore, families sleeping in their mud brick houses aren't much better off. A woman lifts the reed mat covering her high window to check on the weather, and the cold hits her fingers like a slap from the ghost of winter past. The same architectural features that made her house livable during summer, those high, small windows designed to let hot air escape, are now funneling Arctic air directly into her family's sleeping area with the precision of a central air system designed by someone who really hates comfort. Before weather apps warned you about fog advisories, which, let's be honest, you ignore anyway, before you had any way of knowing whether this would be a mild night or a potentially deadly one, Egyptian families had to gamble with their lives based on the colour of the sunset and the behaviour of their chickens. It was like trying to predict the stock market using your pet's mood. Occasionally accurate, but you definitely shouldn't bet your life savings on it. Here's where ancient Egypt really played a cruel joke on its people. You know how we think of winter as hibernation time? Cosy nights indoors, hot chocolate, maybe some Netflix binge-watching while wearing the softest pyjamas money can buy? The Egyptians divided their year into 3 seasons, and winter, called Pere, was when everyone worked their hardest. It was like someone designed a calendar specifically to torture people, as if the Egyptian god of scheduling had a personal vendetta against human comfort. Akhet was the flood season, when the Nile turned the valley into a temporary lake, and everyone became reluctant houseboat dwellers, living like they were on a really terrible reality show called Survivor Ancient Edition. Shemu was harvest time, when the crops came in and everyone celebrated not starving for another year, basically their version of Black Friday, except instead of fighting over discounted TVs, they were grateful for grain. But Pere was when you had to be outside before dawn, ankle deep in freezing irrigation channels, sowing seeds with hands so cold you couldn't feel if you were still holding them. It was like playing an extremely high-stakes game of Operation, except instead of a funny buzzing sound, failure meant your family might not eat. Think about the cosmic unfairness of this arrangement. The coldest, most miserable time of year was when Egyptian farmers had to do their most demanding outdoor work. While you're complaining about your morning commute in a heated car, Egyptian workers were wading through irrigation ditches at 5 a.m, operating a shaduf, basically a primitive water lifting device that required you to grab wet ropes with numb fingers and haul buckets of freezing water up and down for hours. Think of it as the ancient world's most punishing gym equipment, except instead of building abs while listening to your favourite pump-up playlist, you were building the agricultural foundation of civilization, while slowly losing feeling in your extremities and questioning why humans ever decided agriculture was a good idea. Tomb paintings show these scenes with typical Egyptian artistic optimism. Everyone looks calm and dignified, like they're posing for the world's first stock photos. The reality was more like a daily ice bucket challenge that you couldn't opt out of unless you wanted your family to starve. Let's talk about Egyptian housing, because calling these structures homes requires the same generous interpretation of reality that lets us call airplane food cuisine, or airline legroom adequate space for human beings. Most Egyptian workers lived in mud brick houses that were basically architectural examples of Murphy's Law. Anything that could go wrong with seasonal adaptation absolutely did. These houses were built with thick walls that absorbed heat during the day and slowly released it at night, which sounds great until you realise that in winter they were absorbing cold and then methodically distributing it throughout your living space like a refrigeration system, designed by someone who took the phrase, "revenge is a dish best served cold," as a literal architectural blueprint. The windows were small and positioned high on the walls, perfect for letting hot air escape during summer. In winter, they became precision-engineered cold air delivery systems, funneling the desert wind directly into your sleeping area with the efficiency of a modern HVAC system set to Arctic blast and operated by your most passive-aggressive roommate. These windows were often covered with reed mats or wooden screens, which provided about as much insulation as a screen door in a blizzard, or as much privacy as a Facebook privacy setting. Archaeological evidence from Amarna describes houses keeping a jar of embers as a heating system during cold months. Let that sink in. Their heating system was a clay pot with some glowing coals in it. Your smart thermostat has more computing power than the entire ancient world. Your Nest learning system could probably run a small city, and you still complain when the temperature drops 2 degrees below your preferred setting. These people were basically heating their homes with what amounts to a medieval hibachi grill. The roofs were flat, designed for summer sleeping when the house became too hot for human habitation, like having a permanent outdoor bedroom for when your indoor space became uninhabitable. These same roofs became radiant cooling systems in winter, efficiently transferring any accumulated heat directly into the star-cold desert sky, with the enthusiasm of a heat pump running in reverse. Families who had spent summer nights on their roofs, grateful for any breeze and probably looking up at the stars thinking deep thoughts, now avoided them like they were covered in lava, except cold lava that sucked the life out of you. Here's where Egyptian winter survival gets really fun, and by fun, I mean potentially fatal in ways that would make a Final Destination movie seem tame. Families faced a daily choice that would make modern safety inspectors have nervous breakdowns and file reports longer than a Harry Potter book. Slowly poison yourself with smoke, or slowly freeze to death in damp linen. It was like a game show where both prizes could kill you, and there was no option to walk away with a consolation gift or call a friend for help. Clay braziers were the Egyptian heating system of choice, and they were about as sophisticated as you'd expect from a civilization that thought the best way to preserve dead bodies was to remove their brains through their noses and invented hieroglyphics instead of just using emojis like sensible people. These braziers were basically pottery bowls with holes punched in them for airflow, designed to burn whatever you could find that was remotely combustible. The ancient equivalent of burning your furniture to stay warm, except that was literally what they had to do. The fuel hierarchy was brutal in its simplicity, and would make modern energy prices look reasonable. At the top were precious wood and expensive charcoal, materials so rare that using them for heating was like burning dollar bills to keep warm. except dollar bills would actually burn longer and probably smell better. Most families burned agricultural waste, dried reeds, and the crown jewel of Egyptian heating fuel, dung cakes. Yes, dried animal waste was literally their primary heating fuel, which makes your complaints about natural gas prices seem absolutely precious. Modern health research on biomass fuel burning, which is a polite way of saying lighting animal waste on fire in enclosed spaces, shows exactly what Egyptian families were dealing with. We're talking about air quality that would make Beijing on a bad day look like a mountain spa retreat. Burning dung and crop waste indoors increases fine particulates and carbon monoxide to levels that would trigger every air quality alarm in a modern home and probably violate several international treaties. Picture this scene. A father rakes the brazier embers back to life as the sun sets, and the room immediately blooms with eye-stinging smoke. The children start coughing within minutes, like they're attending the world's worst vaping convention, but the alternative is hypothermia, so everyone just accepts that their lungs are taking damage in exchange for not freezing. It's like choosing between breathing secondhand smoke all night or sleeping outside in freezing weather while wet. Basically every choice available was somewhere between bad and catastrophically worse. Families developed strategies for managing this impossible choice. They'd seal rooms partially but not completely, balancing warmth retention against suffocation risk. They'd take turns sleeping closest to the brazier, sharing both the warmth and the respiratory damage. Children would wake up sneezing black specks, but that was considered a small price to pay for waking up at all. The smoke-stained walls, blackened ceilings, and left soot halos around braziers like crime scene evidence of families choosing slow poison over quick freezing. Archaeological evidence shows these soot patterns in excavated houses, silent testimony to thousands of nights spent gambling with their health for the privilege of surviving until morning. Egyptian clothing was designed by people who clearly believed that the only weather condition worth preparing for was unbearably hot. Like if the entire fashion industry was run by people who had only ever lived in Phoenix and thought winter was a myth invented by Northern Europeans to sell sweaters. Linen was the foundation of Egyptian fashion, and while it was perfect for not dying of heat stroke during the day, it was spectacularly inadequate for not dying of hypothermia at night. Linen's selling point, and ultimately its fatal flaw, was breathability. Made from flax, linen wicks moisture away from your body and allows air to circulate freely, which is exactly what you want when you're working in 120 degrees Fahrenheit heat, and exactly what you don't want when you're trying to retain body heat in 40 degrees Fahrenheit fog with 90% humidity. It was like wearing athletic wear designed for hot yoga to an ice hockey game. Most Egyptians owned maybe 2 or 3 pieces of clothing total, a wardrobe that would make minimalists weep with envy, and fashion influencers have existential crises. A basic linen tunic, perhaps a cloak for special occasions, and if they were really prosperous, a second tunic for when the first one was being washed or had achieved sentience through accumulated dirt and decided to walk away on its own, like a rejected character from a Pixar movie. Here's where it gets culturally complicated. Wool existed, and Egyptians knew it worked better for cold weather. But wool had religious baggage that would make modern council culture look simple. Priests were forbidden from wearing wool in temples because it was considered ritually impure, associated with the chaotic god set. So you had this beautiful tension between religious purity and not freezing to death. And guess which one usually won when survival was on the line? Picture a priest shivering through an all-night vigil in freshly washed linen, muttering purity rules under his breath while his teeth chatter loud enough to wake the gods he's supposedly honouring. Meanwhile, a common farmhand wraps himself in a coarse wool cloak without a second thought, because survival trumps theology when you're operating a shaduf at first light with numb fingers and questionable life choices. Egyptian night workers were basically playing survival roulette every time they clocked in for the graveyard shift, while everyone else was huddled around braziers trying to balance smoke inhalation with hypothermia like the world's most depressing chemistry experiment. These brave souls had to venture out into the full Arctic fury of an Egyptian winter night to do jobs that couldn't wait for sunrise. Night fishing was particularly brutal. Imagine sitting in a reed boat that's essentially a floating basket. less seaworthy than your average pool floaty, surrounded by fog so thick you can't see your own hands trying to catch fish while your oil lamp sputters and threatens to leave you in complete darkness. Your linen tunic is soaked through with condensation, your sandaled feet are numb, and every time you move the boat rocks and threatens to dump you into water that feels like liquid ice. It's like extreme fishing, except instead of a TV show and prize money, you get hypothermia and the possibility of feeding your family. Bakers had their own version of a night shift hell that would make modern food service workers grateful for their heated kitchens. They had to stoke ovens before dawn to have fresh bread ready for the morning market, which meant working around open fires while the rest of the world was frozen. You might think this sounds warm and cosy, like working in the world's coziest bakery. But imagine trying to maintain precise temperatures for bread baking while your workspace is a drafty room, and your only light comes from the fire you're trying to control. The irony was that bakers were both the warmest and most fire-hazardous workers in the village. They had access to heat, but they also worked with open flames in buildings made of dried mud and straw. Basically, a fire safety inspector's worst nightmare brought to life. One moment of inattention could turn a warm workplace into a village-destroying inferno, and in winter conditions with numb fingers and smoke-irritated eyes, that moment of inattention was always one mistake away. Egyptian families turned heating into a complex economic strategy that would make modern commodity traders jealous and financial advisors weep. When your survival depends on having burnable materials, every piece of potential fuel becomes currency, and every heating decision becomes an investment in whether you'll wake up alive, like day trading, except instead of losing money, you could lose your life. Dung cakes were the gold standard of Egyptian heating fuel, and families would collect, dry and store them with the same care that other civilizations reserved for actual gold, or that modern people reserve for their cryptocurrency wallets. The process was both art and science. Too wet and they wouldn't burn, too dry and they'd crumble into dust just right, and they'd provide steady heat for hours while filling your house with the distinctive aroma of burning animal waste. The smell was legendary, sharp, acrid, and penetrating in a way that made your eyes water and your throat burn. But Egyptian families learned to associate that smell with survival, creating probably the only civilization in history where eau de burning cow dung was considered a comforting scent, because it meant you weren't freezing to death. It was like the ultimate aromatherapy, except instead of relaxation, the goal was not dying. Wood scarcity created its own economic hierarchy that would make modern lumber prices look reasonable. Long timbers were imported for elite building projects, making wood so expensive that using it for heating was like burning luxury cars to stay warm, or using your iPhone as kindling. Families would hoard scraps of wood like they were collecting Bitcoin during a bull market, saving them for the absolute coldest nights when dung cakes weren't providing enough heat to prevent hypothermia. Oil rationing turned every lamplighting decision into a calculated risk that required more strategic thinking than a chess grandmaster uses. Castor oil lamps provided light and a tiny amount of warmth, but oil was expensive enough that families had to choose between seeing what they were doing and conserving resources for worse nights, like having to choose between charging your phone and keeping your car running when you're stranded. Egyptian families turned sleep into a survival strategy that required more planning than modern people put into vacation itineraries or wedding planning. Every night was a carefully choreographed performance where making the wrong choice about where to sleep, how to position your body, or when to wake up could literally be the difference between seeing sunrise and becoming an archaeological curiosity that future civilizations would study in museums. Most families slept on woven reed mats placed directly on clay floors, which was like choosing to sleep on a giant heat sink designed to suck the life out of you. Imagine sleeping directly on concrete, except concrete would probably be more comfortable and definitely warmer. The floor absorbed any body heat you managed to generate and conducted it directly into the earth, creating a thermal drain that made every sleeping surface feel like a morgue slab. Body heat management became a precision science that families passed down through generations like mathematical formulas or family recipes. except instead of making delicious food, they were making human heating arrangements. Children slept in the centre of family clusters, surrounded by adult bodies that served as human heating elements, like being the filling in a human sandwich designed to prevent hypothermia rather than satisfy hunger. The hierarchy of sleeping positions was determined by cold tolerance and heat generation capacity, creating social dynamics more complex than a reality TV show. The strongest adults took the outside positions where they faced the worst exposure, while pregnant women, elderly family members and children were layered toward the centre. It was like playing human Tetris, except instead of clearing lines, you were trying to clear the night without anyone dying. Livestock integration was both practical and dignity challenging. Goats, chickens and sometimes cattle were brought into sleeping areas because animals generated heat, and their body warmth could mean the difference between survival and freezing. Families learned to sleep next to animals that snored, shifted position, and occasionally decided to relocate in the middle of the night, creating a sleep experience that was part survival, part barnyard management, and part psychological endurance test. Ventilation decisions required calculating the exact balance between fresh air and heat retention, like trying to solve a physics equation where both answers could kill you. Seal the room completely and you risked carbon monoxide poisoning from braziers, but leave openings for air circulation and you invited hypothermia. Families developed ventilation techniques that provided minimal air exchange while retaining maximum heat, creating sleeping environments that were technically safe but far from comfortable, basically achieving the bare minimum of not dying tonight, rather than anything resembling actual comfort. The ember maintenance rotation meant someone had to stay partially awake throughout the night, monitoring braziers to ensure they didn't die out or flare up dangerously, like having a night shift job that you couldn't quit, except instead of getting overtime pay, the penalty for falling asleep was everyone freezing. Families would take turns on ember duty, sacrificing deep sleep to maintain the heat source that kept everyone alive. It was like being a security guard for a fire that could either save your life or burn down your house, depending on your attention span. Wake-up procedures required gradual movement to avoid shocking cold-adapted bodies back into activity, like having to warm up a frozen computer before it would function properly. Sudden movements could cause blood pressure spikes or circulation problems in people who had spent hours in near hypothermic conditions. Families developed morning warming rituals that helped everyone transition from survival sleep to functional consciousness, making their morning routine more complex than modern people's skincare regimens. Bedding was whatever fabric could be spared from other purposes, like playing bedding Tetris with materials that had other jobs during the day. Old tunics, worn cloaks, and reed mats were layered to create insulation barriers between bodies and the cold ground. The bedding was often shared between multiple family members, creating intimate sleeping arrangements that prioritise survival over privacy. Imagine sharing a sleeping bag with your entire extended family, except the sleeping bag is made of scratchy reeds and there's no zipper. While you debate whether to upgrade to Egyptian cotton sheets for better comfort, in a delicious irony considering where those sheets get their name, ancient Egyptian families were sleeping on actual reeds, using their own bodies as heating systems, and treating every night like a team survival exercise where everyone's life depended on staying close enough to share warmth without accidentally suffocating each other. Egyptian workers developed breathing techniques that would make modern cold weather athletes jealous, except instead of optimizing performance for competitive sports, they were optimizing their chances of not dying from respiratory shock or lung damage. When you're living in conditions where both the air inside your house and the air outside can kill you, every breath becomes a calculated decision, like playing respiratory Russian roulette every time you need oxygen. Cold desert air hitting unprepared lungs was like drinking ice water through your respiratory system, except ice water eventually warms up in your stomach, while your lungs had to process frozen air in real time. The sudden temperature shock could cause immediate breathing difficulties, especially for people who were already weakened by malnutrition or previous respiratory damage from smoke exposure. Egyptian workers learned to warm incoming air through their hands, cloth, or even by exhaling into cupped palms and then breathing the slightly warmed air, basically creating primitive personal heating systems using only their own bodies. The fog that rolled off the Nile carried moisture that settled in lungs like liquid cold, creating immediate distress and long-term breathing problems that would make modern air quality specialists weep. Families developed techniques for shallow breathing during fog events, minimizing the amount of damp air entering their lungs while still getting enough oxygen to function, like learning to breathe efficiently in a walk-in freezer filled with wet towels. Here's where the smoke versus cold air dilemma became even more complex, creating daily Sophie's Choice scenarios for respiratory health. Indoor air from braziers caused immediate eye irritation, coughing, and respiratory distress. But outdoor air could shock your lungs and cause breathing problems that lasted for days. Families had to choose between acute smoke poisoning and acute cold exposure, often switching between indoor and outdoor air to give their lungs breaks from different types of damage, like having to choose between two different ways to slowly poison yourself. Children were particularly vulnerable to respiratory shock because their smaller airways couldn't handle sudden temperature changes, as well as adult lungs, like having respiratory systems that were still in beta testing. Parents would teach kids to breathe through cloth, to exhale slowly in cold air, and to recognise the signs of breathing distress in themselves and others. These breathing lessons were literally life or death education that kids had to master before they were old enough to understand why, making respiratory control the ultimate childhood skill that actually mattered. Some families would practice group breathing exercises during the coldest parts of the night, creating synchronised breathing patterns that helped everyone stay calm while sharing whatever warm air could be generated through collective exhalation. It was like meditation, except instead of achieving inner peace, they were achieving not dying from respiratory failure, the ultimate mindfulness practice where the stakes were actual survival. Egyptian families discovered that staying warm wasn't just about external heat sources, it was about turning their bodies into efficient internal heating systems through strategic eating. When you can't afford enough fuel to heat your house, you burn food calories to heat your body from the inside out, creating a survival strategy that required more meal planning than modern people put into wedding receptions or Instagram-worthy dinner parties. The timing of eating became crucial for thermal management, like programming your body's internal furnace on a schedule. Families would save their heaviest, most calorie-dense foods for evening meals, timing their digestion to coincide with the coldest parts of the night. Your body generates heat as it breaks down food, especially proteins and fats, so a strategic dinner could provide hours of internal warming that carried you through the worst cold, basically using dinner as a slow-release heating system. Dense bread made from emmer wheat or barley was the foundation of the Egyptian internal heating system. This wasn't the light, fluffy bread you're used to that practically dissolves in your mouth. This was dense, heavy bread that sat in your stomach like a slow-burning furnace, providing steady warmth as your body worked to digest it. Families would often eat their bread ration for the day in one evening meal, accepting hunger during daylight hours in exchange for internal heat during the night, like intermittent fasting, except the fasting was involuntary, and the eating was for survival rather than wellness trends. Egyptian beer played a crucial role in thermal management that went beyond just the alcohol content. It was basically liquid calories with a side of mood improvement. Egyptian beer was thick, nutritious and calorie-dense, more like liquid bread than the watery beer that modern people complain about. A cup of beer before bed provided calories for internal heat generation, carbohydrates for energy, and enough alcohol to create a warming sensation that helped people fall asleep, despite uncomfortable conditions. Onions became survival food not just because they were available, but because they provided a warming sensation that seemed to help with cold tolerance. Families would eat raw onions before sleep, accepting the social consequences in exchange for the internal warming effects. When you're sleeping in a room with your entire extended family and several animals, onion breath was probably the least of your aromatic concerns, like worrying about bad breath in a room where everyone smells like smoke, clay, and desperation. Egyptian villages operated like early warning systems for cold weather emergencies, where your neighbours weren't just people who lived nearby, they were crucial components in a survival network that could determine whether your family lived or died during harsh winters. Community cooperation wasn't about being friendly or maintaining good relationships. It was about creating redundant safety systems that kicked in when individual family survival strategies failed, like having backup generators for your backup generators, except the generators were other families, and the power outage could be fatal. The smoke watch system was brilliant in its simplicity, like a visual early warning system that required no technology beyond functioning eyeballs. Neighbours would monitor each other's houses for the telltale wisps of smoke that indicated functioning braziers. If a house went dark and smokeless during cold weather, someone would check to see if the family needed emergency fuel, help with their heating system, or temporary shelter. No smoke meant no heat, and no heat meant people were dying, making smoke signals the ultimate neighbourhood watch program. Resource pooling extended beyond fuel to include food, tools, and heating equipment, creating temporary communist societies where private property became negotiable during survival crises. Communities would sometimes designate larger buildings like granaries or workshops as temporary warming centres, where multiple families could share heating resources during the worst nights. The social dynamics were challenging. Imagine being trapped in a confined space with half your village while everyone is cold, hungry, and sleep-deprived. But the thermal efficiency was undeniable, like mandatory sleepovers that could save your life. Information networks spread crucial survival intelligence throughout communities faster than ancient Twitter, except the tweets were about life and death survival information rather than celebrity gossip. Children served as messengers, carrying information between houses about weather predictions, fuel availability, families in crisis, and resource opportunities. These communication systems allowed villages to prepare collectively for particularly harsh nights, distributing resources and coordinating survival efforts before individual families reached crisis points. Emergency protocols developed for families whose heating systems failed completely, creating the ancient equivalent of emergency services that actually showed up when called. When a family's brazier went out, their fuel supplies were exhausted, or their house became uninhabitable due to structural problems, communities had procedures for emergency shelter and warming. These might involve families temporarily moving in with neighbours, community members contributing emergency fuel supplies, or villages reorganising their heating resources to prioritise families in immediate danger, like having a disaster response team that was just your neighbours with extra firewood. Before modern emergency services that can actually be summoned with phone calls, before social safety nets that don't depend on personal relationships, before 911 calls could summon help during heating emergencies, Egyptian villages were creating mutual aid networks that meant the difference between community survival and community death, one cold night at a time, proving that humans figured out we're stronger together long before it became a political slogan. Despite all their ingenuity, community cooperation, and desperate determination that would make modern survival reality shows look like luxury vacations, ancient Egyptian cold weather survival wasn't a perfect system. Sometimes the fog won, sometimes the smoke won, and sometimes families paid the ultimate price for living in one of the world's most challenging environments. Understanding these failures puts their successes in perspective and reminds us just how precarious survival was for ordinary people. Respiratory disease outbreaks were tragically common in the conditions that families created trying to stay warm. Smoke-filled, poorly ventilated spaces filled with multiple family members and livestock created perfect breeding grounds for infections that could kill as effectively as hypothermia. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and other lung diseases often struck during the coldest weather, when families were most vulnerable and least able to care for sick members, like hosting a disease convention in your living room while everyone's immune systems were already compromised. The cruel irony was that the very strategies families used to prevent freezing, crowded sleeping arrangements, sealed rooms, shared airspace with animals, also created ideal conditions for respiratory diseases to spread rapidly through households. A simple cough could become a family death sentence when everyone was breathing the same smoky air in an enclosed space. turning what should have been protective measures into biological warfare against their own families. Building collapses during winter storms weren't just property disasters, they were often fatal events that could wipe out entire families in minutes, like living in houses with the structural integrity of a sandcastle but none of the beachside charm. Mud brick construction couldn't withstand prolonged moisture, wind stress, and temperature fluctuations indefinitely, making ancient Egyptian homes about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The same walls that provided thermal mass for heat retention could become crushing hazards when structural integrity failed during severe weather. Basically, your heating system could literally kill you if the weather got too enthusiastic. Archaeological evidence from sites like Deir el-Medina shows patterns of winter mortality that correlate with periods of severe weather and fuel scarcity, like ancient death certificates that just say, "Winter happened." Burial records indicate mortality spikes during particularly harsh cold seasons, suggesting that even the most prepared communities lost members when conditions exceeded their survival capabilities, making winter the ultimate final boss that occasionally won despite everyone's best efforts. Carbon monoxide poisoning from sealed rooms with braziers was another silent killer that families couldn't easily detect or prevent, like having a heating system that came with a built-in gas chamber feature. The same rooms that retained heat most effectively also trapped deadly gases most efficiently, creating the world's most dangerous energy efficiency standards. Families who sealed their houses too completely to prevent heat loss sometimes never woke up, victims of their own successful insulation strategies, basically dying from being too good at home improvement. Hypothermia deaths occurred even among families who thought they were adequately prepared for cold weather, proving that ancient Egypt was operating on hard mode, even for people who thought they had their survival strategy figured out. The combination of damp linen clothing, clay floors that conducted heat away from bodies like thermal vampires, and insufficient fuel supplies could create conditions where people simply couldn't generate enough heat to maintain core body temperature through the night, like trying to stay warm while wearing wet pajamas in a refrigerator. Children and elderly family members were particularly vulnerable to cold-related mortality, because their bodies couldn't regulate temperature as effectively as healthy adults, like having internal thermostats that were either still in beta testing or past their warranty period. They often receive priority for resources, meaning that adult deaths might follow child deaths as parents exhausted their own survival reserves trying to protect vulnerable family members, creating tragic chains of mortality that started with trying to save the most vulnerable. Fire accidents created devastating losses that went beyond immediate burn injuries, like having your heating system occasionally decide to become an arsonist. A single overturned brazier could destroy a family's shelter, heating supplies, food stores, and possessions in minutes, leaving survivors exposed to cold weather with no resources for rebuilding. Some families never recovered from fire disasters that occurred during cold seasons, making fire both their salvation and their potential destruction, the ultimate frenemy relationship with basic survival technology. Malnutrition combined with cold exposure created downward survival spirals that were almost impossible to escape, like being trapped in a video game where every action cost health points, and there's no way to restore them. Families who couldn't afford adequate food couldn't generate enough internal body heat to survive cold nights, but families who burned their possessions and resources to stay warm often couldn't afford food either. The interaction between hunger and cold created mortality risks that exceeded either problem individually, like facing two boss battles simultaneously with no power-ups. Fuel theft and resource conflicts sometimes destroyed the community cooperation networks that everyone depended on for survival, like if your neighbourhood watch turned into the Hunger Games over heating supplies. Villages that descended into resource conflicts during crisis periods often saw higher mortality rates as cooperation broke down, and families were forced to attempt individual survival without community support, proving that even in ancient times, social media drama could have life or death consequences. Some years were simply too harsh for human survival, regardless of preparation and strategy, like nature occasionally deciding to run a stress test on human civilization with no warning. Unusual weather patterns, failed agricultural seasons, or combinations of disasters could create conditions that exceeded the limits of ancient Egyptian survival technology. During these crisis years, entire villages might be abandoned or populations might migrate to other regions, leaving behind archaeological evidence of communities that couldn't endure. Basically, ancient ghost towns created by weather that was too much even for people who were already living on survival difficulty. The psychological stress of constant survival crisis took its own toll on families and communities. Like having seasonal depression, except instead of just feeling sad, you might actually die if you couldn't maintain your mental health. People who spent months every year wondering whether they would survive to see another season often developed what we might recognise today as trauma responses. Depression, anxiety and despair could undermine survival decision-making and family cooperation, creating emotional failures that led to physical death, proving that mental health was literally a matter of life and death, long before anyone invented the concept of self-care. Before modern understanding of hypothermia treatment, before antibiotics for respiratory infections, before carbon monoxide detectors that beep annoyingly but save your life, before emergency heating assistance that actually shows up when called, Egyptian families were facing life-threatening conditions with nothing but their own knowledge, resources, and determination. That so many succeeded is remarkable, but some failed was inevitable, like playing survival mode on the hardest difficulty setting with no save points and no respawn option. When you flip your thermostat and your house becomes exactly the temperature you want within minutes, an action so casual you probably don't even think about it, you're benefiting from thousands of years of human survival innovation that began with Egyptian families choosing between smoke inhalation and hypothermia in mud brick houses by the Nile. Making your climate control complaints the ultimate first world problems. Every modern heating system incorporates principles that ancient Egyptians discovered through necessity. Thermal mass for heat storage, controlled combustion for fuel efficiency, ventilation management for air quality, and insulation techniques for heat retention. Your central heating is the descendant of clay braziers that families tended through desperate nights, evolved through generations of survival innovation. The community cooperation networks that kept Egyptian villages alive during harsh winters became the foundation for social safety systems that we take for granted today. Emergency heating assistance, community warming centres, fuel assistance programs, and disaster relief services all trace their origins to ancient mutual aid systems, where neighbours shared resources because individual survival was impossible, like the original GoFundMe, except instead of raising money for creative projects, they were raising resources to not die. Modern understanding of respiratory health owes a debt to communities that learned through bitter experience how indoor air pollution affects human survival, basically conducting the world's longest-running medical study on what happens when you breathe smoke every night for your entire life. The connection between biomass fuel burning and lung disease that we document with modern medical research was understood at a practical level by families who had to choose between breathing smoke and freezing to death, making them unwilling pioneers in occupational health hazards. Architectural innovations in insulation, ventilation, and thermal management evolved from survival techniques that ancient Egyptians developed to make uninhabitable buildings barely livable, like early prototypes for everything that makes your house not a death trap. Every well-insulated wall, every efficient heating system, every building code that requires adequate warmth traces back to lessons learned by people who died when these systems failed, making them the ultimate beta testers for home construction principles. Food preservation and preparation techniques that families develop for survival heating needs influenced culinary traditions and nutritional understanding that lasted for millennia. The knowledge of how food consumption affects body temperature, how meal timing influences heat generation, and how nutrition supports cold tolerance became fundamental understanding that shaped human survival worldwide. Basically, ancient people figured out food as fuel before it became a fitness trend, except their version was eat strategically or freeze to death, rather than optimize your macros for peak performance. Medical practices around cold exposure treatment, respiratory health management and community health systems evolved from survival knowledge that began with families learning to recognize hypothermia, treat smoke inhalation, and care for vulnerable members during environmental crises. Your local emergency room's hypothermia protocols are basically advanced versions of knowledge that started with ancient people learning to tell the difference between dangerously cold and regular miserable. Engineering principles around combustion efficiency, heat distribution, and fuel management that families discovered while trying to stay alive became foundational knowledge for technologies that power modern civilization. Your gas furnace operates on principles that Egyptian families pioneered while burning dung cakes in clay pots, which is either inspiring progress or a reminder that even the most sophisticated technology has humble, slightly gross origins. Educational systems that developed to transmit survival knowledge from parents to children became models for knowledge transfer that influenced human cultural development. The methods for teaching practical skills, community cooperation, and emergency response that began with families training children to survive became templates for preserving and advancing human knowledge. Basically, ancient people invented education because learn this or die was extremely effective motivation. Cultural practices including storytelling, religious rituals and community celebrations that served survival functions during harsh conditions became integral parts of human culture that provided meaning and social cohesion far beyond their original survival purposes. Your holiday traditions celebrating warmth, food, and community are descendants of ancient celebrations that basically meant we survived another winter without anyone freezing to death. Party time. The social technologies around resource allocation, conflict resolution, and mutual aid that communities developed for winter survival influenced political systems, economic structures, and international cooperation that shaped human civilization for thousands of years. Modern social safety nets, international aid, and community support systems all evolved from ancient people figuring out that help each other, or everyone dies, was better policy than every family for themselves, making them the original inventors of enlightened self-interest. Your heated home exists because countless generations of people like ancient Egyptian farmers refused to give up when facing conditions that would terrify most modern people. Every warm bed, every hot meal, every comfortable night's sleep represents the accumulated wisdom of people who solved the basic problem of not dying from cold exposure in one of the world's most challenging environments. When you complain about your heating bill, remember that Egyptian families would burn their furniture, their clothing, and occasionally their house materials to stay warm for a single night. Your thermostat argument with your roommate would seem like the ultimate luxury problem to people who had to choose between lung damage and hypothermia as a daily survival strategy. The grocery store full of warming foods that you can prepare instantly would represent unimaginable abundance to families who save their heaviest calories for evening meals, timing their digestion to generate internal heat during the coldest hours, while accepting hunger during the day. Your ability to grab hot soup from a microwave would literally be indistinguishable from magic to people who had to plan their caloric intake like a military campaign. Your house with its insulation, sealed windows, central heating, and structural integrity would seem like impossible magic to people who spent their evenings stuffing mud into wall cracks, like they were playing the world's most depressing version of Jenga, hanging cloth over windows in a futile attempt to create insulation that worked about as well as using a napkin as a winter coat, and praying that their roofs wouldn't collapse during windstorms. Basically living in structures with the structural integrity of a gingerbread house, but none of the sweetness. Modern emergency services that can provide heating assistance within hours would represent a miracle to families who face life-threatening heating failures, with no backup systems, no emergency assistance, and no guarantee that neighbours could help without endangering their own survival. Your ability to call 911 and have professionals show up to fix your heating would seem like summoning magical repair wizards, except these wizards actually exist and don't require sacrificing goats or chanting ancient incantations. The medical care that can treat cold-related illnesses and respiratory problems effectively would seem like divine intervention to communities that lost family members to conditions that are completely preventable with modern knowledge and resources. Your local urgent care clinic, with its heated waiting room and antibiotics that actually work, would be like a temple to the gods of not dying from preventable respiratory infections. Even your concept of individual privacy and personal space builds on thousands of years of progress, from ancient communities where survival required sleeping in crowded rooms, with extended family and livestock sharing air, heat, and intimate space because individual comfort was a luxury that could kill you. Your ability to sleep alone in your own room without goats breathing on you represents the pinnacle of human social evolution. Finally, we've achieved the revolutionary concept that humans and farm animals don't need to be roommates. Weather prediction technology that lets you plan for cold weather days in advance represents the culmination of survival knowledge that began with ancient people learning to read wind patterns and animal behaviour as early warning systems for potentially deadly conditions. Your weather app, which you probably ignore half the time anyway, would seem like having a personal oracle who could predict the future. Except this oracle is right more often than ancient chicken-watching techniques, and doesn't require interpreting bird entrails. Social safety nets that provide emergency shelter, food assistance, and heating help during crises represent thousands of years of evolution, from the community survival networks that Egyptian villages created to help each other endure conditions that no individual family could survive alone. Your local homeless shelter with its functioning heating system represents social infrastructure that ancient communities could only dream of, like having a backup plan for your backup plan, staffed by people who aren't also one crisis away from needing help themselves. Every time you take warmth for granted, adjusting your thermostat without thinking like you're casually controlling the forces of nature, grabbing a warm drink whenever you want one from machines that would seem like sorcery to ancient people, sleeping comfortably alone in your own heated room without livestock as roommates. You're benefiting from the accumulated survival innovations of people who faced impossible choices and found ways to endure. Their legacy lives on in every warm home, every heated workplace, every comfortable winter day that we enjoy without fear, and in your ability to complain about your heating bill while wearing pyjamas that cost more than an ancient Egyptian family's entire winter clothing budget. The comfort and security we consider normal exists because generations of people like ancient Egyptian families turned survival into an art form, refusing to accept that human beings were meant to freeze in the dark while sharing sleeping space with confused chickens. So tonight, when you're warm and safe and comfortable, spare a thought for the ancient Egyptians who turned choosing between smoke poisoning and hypothermia into a survival strategy that helped build the foundation for every comfort you enjoy. Their determination to see another sunrise, one cold desert night at a time, is the reason you can sleep soundly in the warmth they helped make possible. The next time winter weather makes you uncomfortable, remember that your discomfort is temporary, your heating is reliable, and your survival is never in doubt. The ancient Egyptians who pioneered the survival techniques that evolved into your modern comfort would consider your worst cold day to be a miracle of safety and abundance. Their story reminds us that human beings are capable of extraordinary resilience when survival depends on it, and their example shows us that even in the most challenging circumstances, people can find ways to not just endure, but to create foundations for better lives for countless future generations. The warmth you feel tonight is their gift to you, passed down through thousands of years of human progress that began with simple, desperate determination to survive impossible conditions and see another day. And unlike ancient Egyptians, you can enjoy that warmth while binge-watching Netflix and complaining about Wi-Fi speeds, which, when you think about it, is probably the greatest tribute to their legacy we could possibly offer. Think classical Athens was all marble columns and philosophical debates? Think again. While Socrates was asking questions about the meaning of life, 90% of Athenians were too busy trying to survive to care about philosophy. like trying to contemplate existence while working 3-gig economy jobs just to afford ramen. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 430 BCE Athens as a ceramic craftsman in the Kerameikos district. The good news, you're living in the golden age of Western civilization, surrounded by the greatest minds in human history. The bad news, none of them consider you human enough to have a conversation with. You'll spend 12 hours a day with your hands in cold clay, and your life expectancy is roughly the same as your pet hamsters. It's like being an extra in a prestige HBO series, technically part of something important, but nobody remembers your name and you definitely don't get to speak to the main characters. Welcome to Paradise, the ancient Greek version, where democracy exists but you're not invited to the party. You wake to the sound of your neighbour Cleisthenes scraping yesterday's olive oil and dirt off his body with a bronze strigil. It's like someone decided that fingernails on a chalkboard wasn't quite annoying enough, so they added the delightful bonus of knowing exactly what your neighbour's personal hygiene routine sounds like at 5 AM. Think your upstairs neighbour practising tap dance at midnight is bad. Try living next to someone whose morning routine sounds like they're sanding furniture with their own skin. No alarm clock needed when you live in ancient Greece's version of a studio apartment with paper-thin walls. And by studio apartment, I mean a space so small it would violate modern housing codes and probably several international human rights conventions. Your bedroom is a cramped loft above your pottery workshop, and I use the term bedroom the way people use vintage to describe things that are just old and broken, or the way rental listings describe cosy spaces that can fit a bed if you remove all other furniture and possibly a wall. You're sleeping on a straw-stuffed sack that crackles every time you move, like nature's most uncomfortable Rice Krispies cereal, except instead of snap, crackle, pop, it's more like stab, scratch, and why did I choose this life? Think your memory foam mattress is too firm? This thing makes sleeping on concrete seem luxurious, like a 5-star hotel experience. The straw has compressed into lumpy, uneven terrain that creates pressure points in places you didn't know could hurt. Like a medieval chiropractor designed a bed specifically to generate new types of back pain. It's like someone took the concept of a mattress and decided to make it actively hostile to the human spine. The straw shifts and bunches up like it's trying to escape from under you, creating valleys and hills that would challenge a mountain climber. Think finding the cool side of the pillow is a luxury. Try finding any side of this straw sack that doesn't feel like it's personally offended by your existence. The ceiling above you is so low you can touch it without fully extending your arm. Like living in a hobbit hole, except hobbits had better interior decorators and significantly more food. It's made of rough wooden planks that occasionally drop splinters onto your face while you sleep, adding a fun element of surprise to your already challenging rest experience. Privacy is a foreign concept. There's no door to your loft, just a wooden ladder and the constant awareness that anyone in your workshop below can hear every movement, every sigh, every moment of nighttime misery. It's like living in a very small, very public fishbowl, except the fish are judging your sleep habits. As you try to stretch, your back protests with a symphony of pops and cracks that would make a chiropractor rich in about 2,500 years. Every vertebra seems to have its own complaint about yesterday's work, like your spine is filing individual grievances with your brain's HR department. Your neck has developed a permanent crick from hunching over pottery wheels, designed by people who apparently hated human spines. Think the opposite of ergonomic design, like if someone specifically studied human anatomy and then decided to create tools that maximize discomfort. You've got welts across your arms and legs from your bedtime companions. Not a romantic partner, mind you, but a thriving colony of fleas that have been treating you like an all-you-can-eat buffet all night long. It's like having tiny vampires with jumping skills, except they don't have the courtesy to turn you into something cool afterward, and they definitely don't sparkle. These fleas have developed what seems like a sophisticated understanding of your sleep cycle, timing their feeding frenzies for the exact moments when you're trying to drift off, like the world's most annoying alarm clock that runs on blood instead of batteries. The itching is relentless and would drive a modern person straight to urgent care. Every scratch just spreads the irritation, and your fingernails are so embedded with clay that scratching actually makes things worse. You're covered in small red bumps that would send a modern person's WebMD searches into hyperdrive, but for you, they're just Tuesday morning. It's like having chicken pox, except it never goes away, and there's no calamine lotion because pink medicine for skin irritation won't be invented for another 2,400 years. Your kitchen would make a college dorm room look spacious and well equipped. It's like if someone took a modern kitchen and removed everything useful, then made what remained smaller and more difficult to use. It's a corner of your workshop featuring a small brazier that requires constant attention to keep lit. Think of it as the world's most high-maintenance stovetop. A few clay pots that you hopefully made during a more skilled moment, and dreams of real food that will never come true. The brazier is essentially a metal bowl with holes in it, and keeping a fire going requires the kind of patience that would make a modern person throw their phone across the room. It's like trying to maintain a campfire while someone keeps blowing on it inconsistently. Too little air and it dies, too much, and you burn your breakfast. There's no gas range with instant heat, no electric coil that glows reassuringly red, just you, some wood, and the ancient art of making fire cooperate with your breakfast timeline. Breakfast is a barley porridge that tastes like wet sand mixed with disappointment, accompanied by a chunk of bread hard enough to double as a building material. Think your least favourite breakfast cereal is bad? This porridge has the consistency of wet cement and about as much flavour as cardboard that's been left in the rain. The bread requires soaking in watered wine just to become chewable, creating a soggy mess that somehow manages to be both mushy and gritty at the same time, like eating a construction project that's been abandoned halfway through. The wine is so watered down it makes modern light beer seem potent. We're talking about alcohol content that would make kombucha look like moonshine. But it's safer than drinking the water, which comes from a communal well that everyone in the neighbourhood uses for everything from drinking to washing clothes to cleaning chamber pots. It's like a community swimming pool, except instead of chlorine, it's sanitised by hope and prayer, and instead of swimming, people are putting their waste in it. Think your morning coffee ritual is sacred. Try having breakfast while random Athenians walk by your open workshop door, watching you eat like you're part of some primitive morning entertainment. Your workshop opens directly onto the street because walls cost money, and privacy is a luxury for people who can afford it, like living in a house made entirely of windows, except the windows are just open spaces, and everyone walking by feels entitled to commentary. It's like eating breakfast while live streaming to an audience that didn't ask to watch, but feels qualified to offer reviews anyway. Children stop to stare at you eating with the fascination of people watching a zoo animal during feeding time. Adults make comments about your table manners like you're a dinner theatre performance they didn't pay to see, and dogs wander in hoping for scraps that you can't afford to share. The social performance of eating becomes exhausting. You have to maintain some dignity while consuming food that would make a medieval peasant feel sorry for you, all while being observed by people who consider watching you a form of free entertainment. It's like being on a cooking show where you're both the chef and the disaster, except instead of Gordon Ramsay criticising your technique, it's random citizens questioning your life choices. Getting dressed is an exercise in managing expectations and working with what you've got. You're wearing the same wool chiton you've been wearing for weeks. It's now stiff with clay residue and decorated with sweat stains that have achieved permanent resident status. Fast fashion? More like the same fashion, every day, until it literally falls apart and you have to weave a replacement from scratch. Think having to wear the same outfit twice in a week is embarrassing? Try wearing the same outfit for months while everyone watches you work and judges your wardrobe choices. Your clothing has the texture of cardboard, and the smell of someone who works with wet clay in Mediterranean heat, without access to modern laundry detergent, fabric softener, or the concept that clothes should be comfortable. It's like wearing a burlap sack that's been marinated in sweat and clay dust, then left to cure in the sun until it achieves the consistency of armour made from disappointment. Think doing laundry is a chore. Try hand-washing wool clothing with soap that barely exists, in water that you have to carry from a well, then hanging it to dry in a space where privacy doesn't exist, and neighbours feel free to critique your domestic skills. Your laundry day is like a community event where everyone gets to participate in judging your cleaning abilities. Your workspace is a testament to human endurance and the complete absence of ergonomic design principles, like if someone studied occupational safety and then designed the exact opposite. You're crouched on a low stool that seems specifically engineered to destroy your spine, hunched over a wooden potter's wheel that you have to spin by hand while somehow simultaneously shaping clay with the precision of a machine that won't be invented for another 2,000 years. It's like trying to perform surgery while riding a bicycle that you also have to pedal with your hands, while someone judges your technique and questions your competence. The clay is your frenemy, cold, wet, and more temperamental than a modern influencer during a brand partnership dispute. If it's too dry, it cracks like your hopes and dreams. Too wet, and it collapses faster than a cryptocurrency during a market crash. Get it just right, and you might actually make something that someone will consider buying after they've finished criticizing every aspect of your technique, your workspace, and your general existence. Working the clay requires a delicate balance of pressure and patience that would challenge a Zen master on meditation retreat. Too much pressure, and you push through the bottom of your pot, creating an expensive mistake that represents hours of lost work. Too little pressure and the walls are too thin, creating a different but equally expensive mistake. The clay remembers every touch, every hesitation, every moment of uncertainty in your hands, and it will reveal all of your doubts in the final product like a polygraph test made of mud. The marketplace experience is like Black Friday shopping, except everyone is covered in dust. There are donkeys everywhere creating traffic jams, and instead of fighting over discounted electronics, you're trying not to trip over your own pottery while dodging animal droppings and aggressive fish vendors. You're hauling your creations through crowded streets, where philosophers debate the nature of existence, while you focus on the more pressing concern of not dropping the amphoras that represent your food budget for the next week. Think modern customer service is challenging. Try selling handmade goods to people who consider you a step above livestock. Your sales pitch consists of standing behind your pottery display, trying to look confident while wealthy citizens examine your work with the enthusiasm of someone inspecting potentially contaminated produce. Every piece is scrutinized like it's evidence in a criminal trial, and you're both the defendant and the lawyer with no legal training. They'll question your techniques with the authority of someone who's never held clay, suggest improvements to processes you've been perfecting for years, and act like they're doing you a favour by considering a purchase. It's like having every customer be a combination of an art critic, a manufacturing expert, and someone who's never seen pottery before but has very strong opinions about it. Basically the comments section of YouTube, but in person and focused on your livelihood. The haggling process is psychological warfare disguised as commerce. Every customer wants a discount, questions your craftsmanship with the confidence of someone leaving a 1-star Yelp review, and compares your work unfavourably to the potter down the street who apparently makes magical pottery that never breaks and costs half as much. It's like negative Amazon reviews, but delivered to your face by people wearing bedsheets and superiority complexes. Social invisibility reaches peak absurdity in the marketplace. Citizens discuss politics, philosophy, and theatre literally over your head, while you stand there holding their future drinking cups, like you're a very specialised coat rack that happens to make pottery. They'll debate democracy and human dignity while treating you as less than human, creating the kind of irony that would be hilarious if it weren't your daily reality. It's like being a ghost who can make pottery. You're simultaneously essential and invisible, like a piece of equipment that occasionally needs feeding. They're using your craftsmanship to enable their philosophical discussions about human dignity while treating you as furniture. You're close enough to hear their jokes about potters being clay-brained, because nothing says intellectual superiority like mocking the people who make the tools of your civilization possible. Think social media makes you feel invisible. Try standing in a crowded marketplace where people discuss your profession in the third person while you're literally holding the products they need. It's like being mentioned in a conversation where everyone pretends you don't exist while simultaneously needing what you provide. The evening shift brings a special kind of psychological torture, delivering pottery to wealthy homes for their drinking parties, You're walking from your clay dust-covered workshop into a parallel universe where walls are painted with actual art instead of stains. Couches are soft enough to sleep on instead of stools that destroy your spine, and there are enough oil lamps to light up your entire neighbourhood. It's like getting a glimpse of how the other 10% lives, except you're there as a servant, not a guest. Think being a DoorDash driver is demeaning? Try personally delivering pottery to houses that are bigger than your entire neighbourhood, carrying the very items that enable their civilised lifestyle while being excluded from that civilization. You're pouring wine from amphoras you made into cups you crafted, for men in clean chitons who discuss democracy that specifically excludes you from participation. The houses themselves are architectural fantasies compared to your workshop bedroom combo. Multiple rooms serve different purposes. Imagine that luxury, with painted frescoes depicting gods and heroes while your walls are decorated with clay splatter and despair. The floors are smooth, polished stone instead of the rough, gritty surface you call home. Even their storage rooms are more spacious and comfortable than your entire living space. You're serving wine while staying sober, working while they philosophize about the meaning of work. It's like being a waiter at a restaurant where the customers are discussing how waiters aren't real people while you're refilling their water glasses. The conversations you overhear are a window into a world that might as well be on another planet. They discuss Socrates' latest ideas about virtue and justice, while demonstrating neither toward you. Workshop cleanup happens by the flickering light of oil lamps that cast shadows dancing across your pottery, like ghosts of all the cups you'll never own. The oil is expensive, so you use as little light as possible, squinting to see clay scraps and trying not to knock over tomorrow's work. You're scraping dried clay from your wheel with tools that are extensions of your aching hands, organising implements that feel heavier with each passing hour, and preparing for tomorrow's exact repetition of today's misery. It's like Groundhog Day, except Bill Murray's character had better living conditions, a more optimistic outlook, and the possibility that things might change. Every tool needs cleaning and proper placement, because losing or damaging one could set you back weeks financially. Your potter's wheel requires oiling, your clay needs covering to prevent it from drying out overnight, and your kiln fire needs careful banking to maintain just enough heat without burning down your workshop. Personal hygiene is a splash of cold water from a basin, and a futile attempt to remove clay dust that's embedded in your skin like permanent makeup. The water is cold because heating it would require fuel you can't afford, and soap is a luxury that exists mainly in theory. Think your skincare routine is complicated? Try removing industrial-strength mud from your pores using only water, hope, and a rough cloth that feels like sandpaper against skin that's already raw from a day of. Dinner is whatever you can afford after paying rent, buying clay, setting aside money for taxes that fund a government that doesn't represent you, and hoping you don't get sick because medical care costs more than you make in a month. Usually it's more barley porridge, perhaps an onion, if you had a particularly good day at the market and want to live dangerously. It's like meal planning, except your meal plans are porridge, or porridge with a vegetable if the gods smile upon me and I don't need to pay for anything unexpected. The onion, when you can afford it, is treated like a delicacy. You slice it carefully, savouring each piece because it might be weeks before you can afford another one. It's the ancient equivalent of treating yourself, except instead of buying a fancy coffee that costs $6, you're celebrating being able to add flavour to your subsistence-level dinner. You eat alone in your workshop while hearing laughter and intelligent conversation from the symposium next door. It's like being in solitary confinement, except you can hear exactly what you're missing, and it's happening 20 feet away from you. The social isolation is so complete that your pottery wheel starts to feel like your best friend, which is concerning on multiple psychological levels, but also understandable when your wheel is the only thing in your life that responds predictably to your touch. Bedtime routine involves checking that your kiln fire is properly banked so your workshop doesn't burn down overnight. Think smoke detector, except you are the smoke detector, securing your pottery from thieves who might consider your cups worth stealing, and barricading your door with whatever furniture you can find. It's like a home security system designed by someone who's never heard of home security, and implemented by someone who can't afford it anyway. Your sleeping arrangement is a return to the straw sack that smells like clay, sweat, and the gradual death of youthful optimism. Every position causes pain in a different combination of body parts. Your shoulders from the wheelwork, your back from the hunching, your hands permanently cramped from gripping tools all day. It's like trying to get comfortable on a medieval torture device that doubles as a bed. You're too tired to think coherent thoughts, too worried about tomorrow's rent to achieve actual sleep, and too poor to change anything about your situation. It's the holy trinity of insomnia: physical exhaustion, mental anxiety, and economic helplessness. Your brain keeps running calculations about clay costs and customer payments, while your body screams for rest it can't quite achieve, like having your mind stuck in Excel while your body's trying to run a sleep app. The sounds of night create an urban lullaby of survival. Stray dogs fight over scraps in the street like ancient food critics with anger management issues. The night watch calls out the hours like the world's most depressing time announcer, and your own breathing mingles with the settling sounds of cooling pottery. It's like white noise, except instead of being relaxing, it's a constant reminder that you're one economic disaster away from joining those dogs in fighting over scraps. So there you have it, a day in the life of a potter in classical Athens, the supposedly golden age of human civilization. While Pericles was building the Parthenon with slave labour, and Socrates was corrupting the youth with dangerous questions about virtue, 90% of Athenians were just trying to survive until sunset without starving, getting sick, or accidentally offending someone wealthy enough to make their lives even worse. This is what the Golden Age actually looked like for most people: endless labour, social invisibility, economic anxiety, and the constant awareness that the democracy everyone celebrates doesn't include you. Your clean bed, central heating, 8-hour work days, and social mobility would seem like divine gifts to a hypothetical potter. The fact that you can criticise your government without fear, choose your career, and expect your work to be valued would make them weep with joy. Think your job is meaningless. At least you get health insurance, bathroom breaks, and the revolutionary concept that work should end at some point during the day. Think your commute is terrible. At least you don't have to carry your entire day's work through streets filled with animal waste while dodging philosophers who think you're subhuman. But here's the thing that makes it all bearable. Despite everything, potters still found ways to sign their work, take pride in their craft, and create beauty under impossible circumstances. They developed techniques that we still use today, created art that survives in museums while their names have been forgotten, and somehow maintained enough hope to keep getting up every morning and facing the wheel. The human element persists through everything. In a society that treated them as barely human, they remained stubbornly, beautifully human. They fell in love, told jokes, worried about their children, and dreamed of better days. They were just like us, except covered in more clay, and with significantly lower life expectancy, and probably better at accepting that life was hard without expecting it to be fair. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with your weighted blanket and white noise machine, remember our potter friend settling onto his straw sack, listening to rats scurrying in the walls and calculating whether tomorrow's sales might finally be enough to buy that extra onion for dinner. Close your eyes and picture the workshop finally quiet, the wheel still, the clay settled into its bowls for tomorrow's work. Somewhere in ancient Athens, a potter is finally getting the rest he earned but could never quite afford, dreaming perhaps of a world where craftsmanship is valued, voices matter, and tomorrow holds possibilities beyond mere survival. Sweet dreams. At least your mattress isn't a haystack with a rat colony for roommates, and your biggest concern isn't whether you'll have enough clay to work with tomorrow, instead of whether Netflix has anything good to watch. Tonight we end with the surprisingly intoxicating world of ancient Roman recreational chemistry. The civilization that gave us aqueducts, concrete, and apparently a government-sponsored sweetener that was slowly driving everyone insane. Like if the FDA decided to approve a sugar substitute that also happened to be a neurotoxin, but everyone kept using it because it made their lattes taste amazing. Let's start with something that perfectly captures Roman ingenuity. They managed to create the world's most delicious poison and convince an entire empire to put it on everything. Like if Willy Wonka had a chemistry degree and zero regard for public safety. You've probably seen Roman banquet scenes in movies. All those elegant people in togas reclining on couches like ancient influencers, delicately eating grapes and honey cakes while making important decisions about conquering the world. What the movies don't show you is that everything they're eating is slowly driving them insane, like a dinner party catered by someone who fundamentally misunderstands the concept of farm to table. Meet Sapa, the Roman sweetener that was literally too good to be true, the original too good to be healthy product that would make modern wellness bloggers have simultaneous heart attacks and existential crises. The process was simple enough. Take the sweetest grape juice you can find, boil it in lead-lined pots until it becomes a thick amber syrup that's so concentrated it glows like liquid gold. Think maple syrup, except instead of coming from trees, it comes from a process that would violate every food safety regulation ever written. The lead leaches into the mixture, creating a sweetness so perfect, so impossibly delicious, that it became the most coveted ingredient in the Roman world. It was like if someone discovered that adding mercury to chocolate made it taste even better. Technically true, but with side effects that include gradual neurological meltdown. Now, to be clear, Romans knew they were using lead pots. They chose lead specifically because it made the syrup taste better. Lead has this naturally sweet flavour that enhances other sweetness, creating something that seemed almost divine. Which in a way, it was. If your gods happen to enjoy slow-motion neurological destruction and watching civilizations make terrible dietary choices for centuries, Romans put Sapa in everything with the enthusiasm of people discovering truffle oil for the first time, except truffle oil doesn't cause brain damage. Morning honey cakes to start the day right, with a side of heavy metal poisoning. Wine to make it sweeter, because regular wine apparently wasn't doing enough damage to their decision-making abilities. Meat preservation for long journeys, ensuring that not only would your food last longer, but you'd gradually lose the ability to remember why you were travelling in the first place. They even sweeten their medicine with it, because apparently if you're going to cure someone's headache, why not give them lead poisoning as a bonus? It's like a medieval version of treating symptoms while creating entirely new problems, except the new problems involve permanent cognitive impairment. But here's where it gets interesting from a neurochemical perspective. Lead poisoning doesn't happen overnight. It builds up slowly, creating symptoms that read like a catalogue of Roman imperial behaviour. Mood swings, check. Hallucinations, absolutely. Paranoia followed by periods of dreamy confusion, classic. Violent outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere, definitely. It's like a progression chart for how to gradually destroy an empire through gourmet food choices. Consider Emperor Caligula, who started his reign as a beloved young ruler, the people's choice, everyone's favourite. Basically the ancient equivalent of a popular YouTuber with millions of subscribers. Then gradually, and I mean gradually, he descended into legendary madness that would make reality TV producers take notes. He declared war on the ocean and ordered his soldiers to collect seashells as spoils of victory, which is like declaring war on clouds and claiming victory when it rains. He made his horse a senator, which honestly might have improved the quality of Roman political discourse. He claimed he could talk to the moon, apparently having personal conversations with celestial bodies like an ancient version of someone who thinks their smart speaker is sentient. For centuries, historians have tried to figure out what happened to Caligula using political science, psychology, and various theories about power corruption. But when you realise that as emperor, he had unlimited access to the finest foods and wines, all sweetened with the best Sapa money could buy, a different picture emerges. The guy wasn't going crazy in the traditional sense. He was being slowly poisoned by his own luxury lifestyle, like someone whose organic, artisanal, small-batch breakfast cereal was laced with industrial toxins. And it wasn't just emperors. The entire Roman upper class was consuming Sapa daily, creating a leadership hierarchy that was gradually becoming chemically impaired. Senate debates, military planning sessions, important legal decisions, all being made by men whose brains were slowly accumulating toxic levels of lead. The poor Romans, who couldn't afford the fancy sweetener, were literally the only ones living in reality while their leaders operated in an increasingly surreal chemical haze. Roman dinner parties featuring Sapper became legendary for their intensity, creating social gatherings that were part dinner party, part accidental drug experience, and part group psychological experiment. Guests would arrive normal and leave convinced they'd experienced divine visions, received messages from gods, or solved the fundamental mysteries of existence. Roman writers described these gatherings as transcendent spiritual experiences with the enthusiasm of people reviewing their first music festival. They had no idea they were just describing group lead poisoning with really good food presentation. It's like if every dinner party gradually turned into a philosophical symposium where everyone became convinced they were geniuses, except instead of alcohol lowering inhibitions, it was heavy metals rewiring neural pathways. The conversations probably started normal, discussing politics, family news, local gossip, and gradually escalated into debates about the nature of reality and personal communications with Jupiter. The truly dark part. This went on for centuries, generation after generation of Roman elites consuming this sweet poison, making decisions about war and peace while operating in a chemical haze they didn't even know existed. Sometimes the fall of Rome isn't such a mystery after all. It's what happens when your entire leadership class spends centuries gradually poisoning themselves with gourmet neurotoxins. Forget everything you think you know about Roman wine culture. Roman wine wasn't the elegant drink you might sip at a dinner party while discussing the merits of different vintages. Roman wine, especially the good stuff, was basically liquid fire that could strip paint and occasionally cause spontaneous religious experiences, like if someone took modern wine and decided it needed to be both stronger and more hallucinogenic. Let's talk about Falernian wine, the Roman equivalent of drinking lightning while someone empties your bank account and possibly your soul. This came from the volcanic slopes of Mount Falernus, where the ash-enriched soil produced grapes so potent they practically glowed with radioactive wine energy. But fresh Falernian was harsh, brutal, almost undrinkable, like nature's own version of paint thinner that happened to come from grapes. The magic happened in the aging process, which was less like wine aging and more like controlled chemical weapons development. The best Falernian was aged for decades, sometimes longer than the people drinking it had been alive. Roman wine cellars contained amphorae that had been quietly fermenting since before their grandfathers were born, developing alcohol concentrations and chemical compounds that pushed the boundaries of what could still be called wine instead of industrial solvent with grape origins. Aged Falernian was so strong it was literally flammable, not metaphorically strong, but actually capable of being lit like oil lamps. Roman writers describe wines that could burn with a blue flame that danced across the surface, which is either the most metal thing ever invented, or a serious indication that your beverage has crossed the line from alcoholic drink to chemical hazard. The alcohol content was so high that drinking it undiluted was considered a test of Roman fortitude, like a drinking contest with potentially fatal consequences and no participation trophies. But the alcohol was only part of the story, like saying LSD is just a chemical compound. The aging process created chemical compounds that enhanced the psychoactive effects far beyond simple drunkenness. Roman writers described Falernian as producing visions, prophetic dreams, and direct communion with the gods. Whether these were spiritual experiences or just really effective ancient drugs is still debated by scholars who probably wish they could conduct first-hand research. The price was absolutely insane, making modern luxury wine prices look reasonable. A single jar of premium-aged Falernian could cost more than most Romans earned in their entire lives. Imagine spending your annual salary on one bottle of wine, except this wine might also give you visions and possibly permanent psychological changes. Wealthy Romans would mortgage property, sell slaves, go into crushing debt just to serve authentic Falernian at important dinners. The social pressure was enormous. Serving cheap wine at a significant gathering could destroy political careers faster than a modern Twitter scandal. Here's how a typical Falernian dinner party would unfold, like a carefully orchestrated descent into controlled madness. The evening starts normal enough, with regular wine and civilized conversation about politics, family, and whether gladiators are getting soft these days. Then the Falernian appears, usually with ceremony involving special cups and toasts to Bacchus that feel more like invoking ancient chemical deities. Within an hour, the entire atmosphere changes completely, like someone switched the channel from PBS to Adult Swim. Guests start having what they believe are profound revelations about the nature of existence, the kind of insights that feel earth-shattering in the moment, but probably seem questionable when reviewed by morning. Political alliances form based on shared hallucinations about divine guidance. Business deals get struck between men who are convinced they've received supernatural insights about each other's trustworthiness. The Roman Empire was built by men drinking something called posca, which sounds like a mistake, but was actually one of history's most successful examples of military pharmaceutical distribution disguised as refreshment, like if Red Bull was invented by an army quartermaster with a chemistry background and no regulatory oversight. Posca started as a practical solution to military logistics. Armies need hydration, but water spoils faster than Roman political promises, wine is expensive, and beer doesn't travel well when you're marching across half of Europe. Roman quartermasters discovered that mixing vinegar with water created a stable, transportable drink that could last for months without refrigeration. But then they got creative in ways that would make modern sports drink manufacturers take notes. Roman military manuals describe adding specific herbs and substances to posca depending on what the army was facing, like customized pharmaceutical support for different combat scenarios. Fighting Germanic tribes in winter, add warming spices and mild stimulants to help soldiers endure the cold while maintaining combat effectiveness. Desert campaigns in Egypt include herbs for heat tolerance and substances that helped manage the psychological stress of fighting in alien landscapes far from home, where the main enemies were sun exposure and existential dread. The genius was in the delivery system, which solved the ancient military problem of getting soldiers to take their medicine. Instead of trying to convince soldiers to take supplements or medications, Roman commanders just put everything in the daily drink ration. Every legionnaire automatically consumed their pharmaceutical support without thinking about it, without resistance, without even realizing they were being systematically medicated for optimal performance. Different legions developed their own posca recipes like closely guarded trade secrets, passed down through military generations. Veterans would share formulas in the same way modern soldiers share gear recommendations. Add more wormwood for night operations, or this bark from Gaul makes charging enemy lines seem less terrifying and more like a reasonable career choice. The Roman army was essentially crowdsourcing battlefield drugs centuries before anyone invented the concept of collaborative pharmaceutical development. Roman soldiers on enhanced posca were described by their enemies as unnaturally resilient, creating reputation effects that probably helped win battles before they even started. Germanic tribes spoke of Romans who seemed immune to wounds that should have dropped them. Gallic warriors reported fighting legionnaires who appeared to feel no pain, who kept attacking even with serious injuries that would normally end combat effectiveness immediately. Modern analysis suggests Roman soldiers were consuming combinations of pain relievers, stimulants, and mild euphoriants, basically custom battlefield enhancement that made them better fighters while maintaining enough cognitive function to follow orders. They weren't drunk in the way that impairs performance. They were systematically medicated for optimal battlefield performance, like ancient super soldiers running on herbal enhancement protocols. But the effects went beyond combat effectiveness. Roman soldiers stationed in peaceful provinces continued drinking enhanced posca out of habit, creating a population of veterans who had become accustomed to daily chemical enhancement. Veterans retiring throughout the empire maintained their recipes, creating communities of former soldiers operating in a perpetual mild-altered state while building Roman civilization. Roman gladiatorial games weren't just blood sports designed to entertain the masses. They were carefully engineered pharmaceutical experiences designed to transform 50,000 people into a chemically unified crowd that could watch human beings die for entertainment without feeling bad about it afterward. It's like if modern sports stadiums served drinks specifically designed to make violence seem not just acceptable, but enjoyable. Picture the Colosseum on a busy afternoon, with vendors moving through the crowd selling wine that sparkles strangely in the sunlight. This isn't ordinary wine you could buy at any tavern. It's specifically blended for amphitheatre events, designed to enhance the spectacle experience while managing inconvenient human emotions like empathy, moral revulsion, and the normal human response to watching people get torn apart for fun. Roman amphitheatre wine came in varieties matched to different events, like a pharmaceutical menu designed by someone who understood crowd psychology. Gladiator combat required blends with mild euphoriants and substances that enhanced excitement while reducing squeamishness about blood and suffering. Animal hunts needed mixtures that boosted bloodlust and appreciation for human dominance over nature. Executions called for stronger stuff, wine that helped audiences maintain their festive mood while watching criminals get torn apart by lions, which is probably the most disturbing sentence in human event planning history. The progression was carefully managed throughout the day, like a controlled pharmaceutical experience designed to gradually eliminate human compassion. Early events featured lighter wines to relax inhibitions and build crowd energy, getting everyone in the mood for increasingly intense entertainment. As the day advanced and spectacles became more brutal, the wine got stronger, ensuring that audience reactions remained enthusiastic rather than horrified. Roman religious practices included services that combined spiritual devotion with consciousness alteration and economic activities that would make modern religious leaders either fascinated or deeply uncomfortable, depending on their theological flexibility and views on mixing sacred experiences with chemical enhancement. Walk into a temple of Venus on a warm Roman evening, and the air is thick with incense that makes you feel lightheaded, not just from burning herbs, but from carefully crafted chemical combinations designed to alter consciousness. Priestesses move between columns carrying wine cups that seem to glow in the lamplight, and this isn't just atmospheric lighting effects. This isn't wine you could purchase anywhere else. It's a carefully crafted chemical experience designed to facilitate what Romans called divine communion through very earthly methods. Roman temple wine wasn't ordinary wine any more than temple activities were ordinary worship. These sacred beverages contained additives designed to enhance spiritual receptivity while reducing conventional moral inhibitions, like liquid meditation that also happened to make everything feel more meaningful and personally significant. Roman sources describe temple wines that promoted divine love, sacred unity, and spiritual openness, terms that become much clearer when you realize they were describing chemical effects rather than purely spiritual experiences. Temple priestesses weren't just religious figures reading from holy texts. They were trained specialists who understood exactly how to prepare and administer consciousness-altering substances for spiritual purposes. They knew dosages, timing, and combinations that would enhance religious experience without causing unconsciousness or other side effects that might interfere with the temple's various services. It was like having pharmaceutical specialists with theology degrees. Romans approached death with the same systematic planning they brought to everything else: elaborate preparation, social competition, and enough chemical enhancement to transform tragedy into something approaching performance art with pharmaceutical support. Death wasn't just an ending. It was a carefully curated experience that required professional management and chemical assistance. Wealthy Romans didn't just plan their funerals like modern people choosing flowers and music. They curated their entire death experience starting months in advance. This included pharmaceutical preparation that began long before actual dying became imminent. Roman death kits contained substances designed not just for pain management, but for emotional and spiritual preparation, vision enhancement, and ensuring the dying process would be transcendent rather than merely dignified. But Roman death culture extended far beyond the person actually dying. Funeral preparations included chemical support for the entire mourning process, recognizing that grief was a complex emotional experience that could be improved through pharmaceutical assistance. Roman families prepared specialized wines for different grief stages, mild sedatives for initial shock, euphoriants for funeral celebrations that were supposed to honor the deceased rather than just being sad, and transition substances to help mourners return to normal social life without lingering emotional disruption. The most elaborate funerals included professional mourners trained not just in grief performance, but in consuming specific substances that produced authentic emotional responses while maintaining enough control for effective performance. These weren't actors pretending to be sad, they were pharmaceutical artists who could chemically induce real tears and genuine anguish on command, while still delivering the emotional impact that families were paying for. With a civilization built on daily systematic intoxication, Romans developed the ancient world's most sophisticated hangover management industry. Professional specialists, pharmaceutical protocols, and economic systems designed around managing the consequences of living in permanent chemical alteration. It's like if modern civilization was built around people being slightly drunk all the time, and we developed an entire healthcare system just for managing the side effects. Picture a Roman morning after typical evening social obligations, which might include anything from dinner parties to religious experiences to amphitheatre events. Wealthy Romans slowly come to terms with whatever substances they'd consumed. But this isn't amateur suffering of the kind you experience after a particularly regrettable college party. This is professional recovery with specialised medical support that treated chemical consequences as seriously as any other medical condition. Roman physicians specialised in wine sickness treatment, with detailed diagnostics based on exactly what substance combinations had been consumed. Different chemical hangovers required different treatments with the precision of modern emergency medicine. Sapa-sweetened wine produced one type of misery requiring specific remedies. Falernian created another entirely different set of symptoms. Mixed consumption from temple visits or amphitheatre events required protocols resembling what modern doctors might use for treating complex drug interactions. Wealthy Romans employed personal hangover specialists, physicians who understood their individual consumption patterns, maintained custom remedy collections, and could be summoned any hour for immediate relief. These weren't just doctors making house calls, they were pharmaceutical concierges making it possible to maintain chemical lifestyles without inconvenient consequences interfering with daily responsibilities or social obligations. After wandering through this maze of Roman recreational chemistry, what emerges is a picture of something both remarkable and deeply unsettling. A civilization that had successfully integrated mind-altering substances into every aspect of human existence, without recognizing they were living in a permanently altered state. It's like if our entire society was based on coffee culture, except instead of coffee, it was a complex system of consciousness modification that touched every aspect of daily life. Romans didn't just use consciousness-changing substances recreationally like modern people having drinks on weekends. They used them strategically, with sophisticated understanding of how chemical enhancement could optimize human performance, social cohesion, and political control. Roman substance use was about enhancement rather than escape. Better soldiers, more compliant citizens, more entertaining spectacles, more meaningful spiritual experiences, more manageable emotional reactions to difficult circumstances. But Roman chemical culture was deeply embedded in power systems and social hierarchy in ways that reinforced existing inequalities. The elite had access to exotic, potent compounds, enhancing their capabilities, while ordinary Romans made do with cheaper alternatives, or went without entirely. Roman consciousness alteration reinforced existing power structures rather than challenging them, creating a society where chemical privilege paralleled political privilege. Perhaps most remarkably, Romans developed sustainable approaches to consciousness alteration that lasted centuries without destroying their civilization. Their practices were embedded in social institutions, regulated by law, supported by professional expertise, and economically integrated into the broader imperial system. This wasn't a civilization destroying itself with drugs. This was a civilization using drugs as tools for social engineering on a massive scale. The Roman approach was pragmatic, systematic, and surprisingly modern in its sophistication. They understood quality control, dosage management, harm reduction, and the crucial importance of social context and professional supervision. They knew the difference between enhancement and impairment, between therapeutic and recreational applications, between individual and collective chemical experiences. What does this tell us about human nature and the relationship between consciousness and civilization? Maybe that our modern struggles with substance use aren't signs of social decay, but evidence we're still learning lessons Romans mastered 2,000 years ago. That consciousness alteration is a fundamental human drive that can either support or undermine social stability, depending on how it's managed, regulated, and integrated into social systems. The Romans didn't get high to escape their civilization or rebel against social expectations. They got high to run their civilization more efficiently, to make it more entertaining, to give it spiritual depth, and to solve the fundamental problem of how to make millions of people cooperate in building and maintaining a complex society. Whether this approach actually worked is debatable, but their methods were certainly more sophisticated than most people realize. And honestly, when you consider that the Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years, created infrastructure we still use today, developed legal systems that still influence modern civilization, and managed to integrate consciousness alteration into daily life without destroying their society, maybe they understood something about the relationship between altered states and human potential that we're still trying to figure out. Think about it. We live in a world where people argue about marijuana legalization while drinking coffee, taking prescription medications, and consuming alcohol. All forms of consciousness alteration that we've decided are acceptable. Romans just had a more comprehensive and systematic approach to the same fundamental human tendency to alter consciousness for various purposes. The difference is that Romans treated chemical enhancement as a normal part of human optimization, rather than as a moral failing or social problem. They approached consciousness alteration with the same systematic thinking they applied to engineering, military tactics, and government administration. Whether this was wise or insane probably depends on your perspective about the role chemicals should play in human society. Sweet dreams, and be grateful you live in an era where your sweetener doesn't contain heavy metals, your entertainment doesn't require chemical courage to enjoy, your spiritual experiences don't come with pharmaceutical prerequisites, and your hangovers can be treated with simple hydration, instead of requiring professional intervention and economic planning. Although honestly, Roman recovery specialists might have been onto something. Imagine if hangover treatment was covered by insurance and performed by trained professionals, instead of just suffering through it with regret and convenience store remedies.